Thank you all. It's nice to be here and to conclude the Birmingham Colloquium. And I've enjoyed the other papers here and getting to discuss manuscripts and other interesting things over meals and during the breaks. So it's a privilege to participate in this. And thank you, Christina, for introducing me, and to Hugh and Kat for organizing the colloquium. My paper is Direct Copying in a Group of Gospel Manuscripts with Catenae. And the publication of the Editio Critica Maior of the Gospel of Mark in 2021 and the accompanying online tools provided New Testament text critics with unparalleled access to the text and manuscripts of Mark. And during my research on the Catenae and the Gospels, I explored a group of 4 catena manuscripts dating from the 12th to the 16th centuries, with a nearly identical set of commentaries on the Gospels only found in these 4 codices. I was delighted to learn that these 4 documents happen to also have been selected as witnesses for ECM Mark. Closer examination of the biblical text in these manuscripts using the tools of the CBGM provided by the INTF has led to the identification of these manuscripts not only as a distinct group based on their commentaries, but also as a group within the textual tradition of the Gospels. Moreover, the newest of these codices proves to be a direct copy of another member of the group. The 3 other codices cannot be proven to be direct copies of one another, but they may have been copied from the same exemplar. And I would suggest that the format of the catena may have facilitated the high degree of homogeneity that we find in these documents. So let me introduce you to the manuscript group. The catena manuscripts GA 238 split now between 2 institutions in Moscow, GA 377 at the Vatican Library, GA 807 at the Library of the Greek Parliament in Athens, and GA 1160 on Patmos, have a nearly identical set of catenae on the Gospels and were included in ECM Mark as representatives of the Codices Byzantini because of their close affiliation of the majority text. They present the full text of each Gospel with the catena in alternating format, and the group contains a nearly identical set of combination of catena on the Gospels shown on this slide according to their classification by Georgi according to the designations in the Clavis Patrum Graecorum. So as you can see, the catena in this group of manuscripts are not only identical, except for one type in one gospel, but this combination of catena on the 4 gospels is also not found in any other catena manuscripts. The type that they share in Matthew, C112.4, is an expansion of the commentary attributed to Peter of Laodicea. It's only attested by 5 manuscripts of the 4 gospels and 5 other manuscripts that have only 1 or 2 gospels. Therefore, these 4 manuscripts comprise nearly all of the complete gospel manuscripts of that type. The pseudonymous catenae attributed to Victor of Antioch and Mark, C125.1, and to Titus of Boctra and Luke, C130, appear in dozens of codices, but rarely together. There are only 8 witnesses combining these 2 works in a single document, including the 4 codices listed on the slide here. And the catena in John C147.6 is unattributed and falls within the codices singuli category, as it was initially only known through GA 377. It is only attested by the 3 group members shown on the slide here. These manuscripts, therefore, stand out among the hundreds of Greek New Testament catena manuscripts on the Gospels for their unique combination of catenae. The form of the biblical text in these manuscripts also demonstrates that they form a distinct group. Von Soden first wrote about the remarkable similarity of these manuscripts, dubbing them die Dubletten codices, because of their shared commentaries and the form of their biblical text. He further elaborated that they are duplicates among themselves. The CBGM tools developed by the INTF facilitate a comprehensive analysis of all 4 manuscripts in the Gospel of Mark. The textual flow diagram for Mark links these manuscripts in a direct sequence with no stems, showing a tight connection between their text that is not shared with any other witnesses. When the majority text is inserted into the textual flow diagram, their stem descends directly from the MT node, reflecting the high degree of similarity between these codices and the MT and their number of similar non-majority readings. The CBGM's Compare Witnesses tool shows a complete collation of any 2 manuscripts selected for the ECM at every variation unit and allows one to search for a manuscript's nearest relatives. The data accessed in the Compare Witnesses tool indicates exceptionally high degrees of agreement between these 4 manuscripts, and the codices the codices are the most highly ranked relatives, with the MT following as a 4th ranked not too distant relative. So here's the total agreement between the manuscripts. The total agreement of these manuscripts is shown with the MT added as a point of reference so that you can see where they most closely relate outside of the group. They have remarkable coherence and with one another that is even closer than their affiliation with the MT, which was the reason that they were included in the ECM in the first place. The least similar pair still agrees in 97.992% of places, and two pairs agree more than 99% of the time. While the agreement between the four manuscripts suggests that they form a unique group within the textual tradition of the Greek New Testament, examining their differences from the majority text and one another confirms their group identity. This is where the information in the compare witnesses tool becomes invaluable. Here we go. There are 400. This is the old version. Sorry. There was a slide here, but you'll have to take these numbers in your head. There are 437 variation units in which at least one of the four manuscripts disagrees with one another or the majority text. In 310 of those variation units, they read all together against the majority text. And then in 125 variation units, they read, they have a split group reading with one side agreeing with the majority text against the rest. So this table shows the number of witnesses sharing this group's agreements against the majority text in the ECM apparatus, up to 10 total witnesses. So the number of witnesses includes the four group members. So on this slide, a reading that's attested by only four witnesses is only found in the manuscripts selected for the ECM in these four manuscripts. And 10 would have 6 other manuscripts joining these four in the reading that they share. The data presented in the table shows a clear group identity that makes these four codices distinct from other Greek New Testament manuscripts. There are 50 places where the group reads together against the entire tradition of Greek New Testament manuscripts. And nearly 25% of the group disagreements with the majority text, no more than 2 other manuscripts share their reading. And collectively, in 40.32% of the variation units, where the group disagrees with the majority text, their reading is only found in fewer than 10 total manuscripts. Therefore, it's possible to distinguish a coherent group identity in these places where the group reads against the majority text with only a small number of codices, and especially in the places where they read alone. So this overview has shown that the four Gospels Catena manuscripts, GA238, GA377, GA807, and GA1160, form a distinct group of Greek New Testament manuscripts based on their text in Mark. For this presentation, I have not explored the other Gospels, but can confirm that the pattern holds outside of Mark based on the selective data that we have available from other sources. They have a unique combination of Catenae not found in any other manuscript containing all four Gospels, and a biblical text that frequently diverges from the majority text as a group against all other manuscripts. Since alternating Catenae were almost exclusively copied from other alternating format manuscripts, this group of Gospel manuscripts likely descends from another alternating codex. The process of copying the biblical and Catena texts in discrete sections may have led to the preservation of a distinct form of the biblical text, because this was not a format easily compared with continuous text manuscripts. And that these four manuscripts agree with one another in nearly every one of the 5,500 variation units in Mark presents the likelihood of not only one event of direct copying, but potentially multiple instances of this rare circumstance. So let's turn to a direct copy. As the youngest manuscript being copied in the 16th century, GA377 is the most likely candidate to be a direct copy of one of the 12th century manuscripts. Remarkably, GA377's overall agreement with all three group members in Mark is higher than some other manuscripts that have been shown to be obschrifted. Despite their textual affinity, GA1160 can be eliminated as the exemplar for GA377 because it has a different type of catena and form of the gospel text in John. Between the remaining two group members, the closest potential ancestor for GA377 is GA807. And again, these two manuscripts agree in 99.22% of places in Mark, disagreeing in only 43 variation units out of more than 5,500 variation units that they share. Such a high rate of agreement suggests the possibility that one is copied from the other. GA377 and GA807 share dual agreements both with their manuscript group and the larger corpus of Greek New Testament manuscripts. The two codices have 19 dual readings against the other two members of the group in Mark. In 6 of these instances, their reading is attested in 5 or fewer witnesses, which are listed on this slide, and 4 of these are exclusively found in GA377 and GA807. Even in codices, which have a text that is exceptionally close to the majority text in Mark and to their nearest relatives, there are still unique dual readings that can be found in other manuscripts, which I think is very interesting. Examining the 43 disagreements between GA 377 and GA 807 substantiates that 377 is a direct copy of 807. In his work on Abschriften, Alan Farnes noted that there are places that are difficult to read in a parent manuscript, which correspond to unusual readings or differences in the child manuscript to potentially indicate a direct copy relationship. We have this in this example. At Mark 431, GA 377 splits from GA 807 and the other group members reading kakho instead of kakon. At this word, the on ending in GA 807 is obscured by bleed through, so that the open space at the top of the nu appears to be connected, loosely resembling an omega. The letter form doesn't match other omegas in the manuscript, but the bleed through gives a plausible explanation for the difference between the two manuscripts. The most common type of disagreement are those in which GA 377 has additions, duplications, or omissions, which can be explained by the process of copying from GA 807. A duplication occurs at Mark 2:16, when GA 377 repeats the phrase elegon tois mathe tais autu ti hati meta ton telonon kai harmatolon against the three group members in the MT. This minority reading is only attested in 3 manuscripts. The duplication likely occurred due to eye skip. The phrase ton telonon kai harmatolon immediately precedes the sentence beginning elegon tois and are also the final words of that textual unit. In GA 807, the second instance of kai harmatolon occurs exactly 1 line below the first. Thus, the scribe of GA 377 inadvertently returned to kai harmatolon before elegon instead of the one before SDA and duplicated the clause. As visible here on the slide where I've underlined it. The proximity of the 2 words in GA 807 explains the duplication that we see in GA 377. Another duplication occurs at Mark 9:12 when the scribe of GA 377 duplicated the phrase hada apokryphes epen autus or autois elias men elthon proton. In this case, the scribe recognized their error and struck the mistake. The word proton immediately precedes the duplicated phrase and is its final word, as in the previous example. And in GA 807, both instances of proton are stacked immediately above and below one another on separate lines. The scribe of GA 377 likely skipped to the proton from the previous verse and then began copying from there before realizing their mistake and then deleting it and carrying on from where they should have been writing from the first place. The proximity of the words in GA 807 explains the mistake made by the scribe of GA 377. A series of disagreements between the 2 manuscripts occurs due to omission in GA 377 at Mark 9:45-46. This is a part of a complex passage in Mark with many similar words in 2 verses, Mark 9:44 and 46, which are identical and omitted from most modern Bibles. GA 377 reads against GA 807 in the omission of Mark 9:45-46, or because of the identical verses 44 and 45. GA 377 leaps from spenutai at the end of Mark 9:44 in line 5 of this image and begins verse 9:47 with kai eon ha aphomas. As in the cases of duplication, the scribe of GA 377 omitted these verses due to eye skip based on the proximity of similar words in GA 807, shown here. GA 807 attests verses 9:44-46 in the form in which they are found in the majority text. If the scribe of GA 377 omitted verses 45 and 46, they skipped from spenutai, which occurs in the final third of line 7, to the same word in verse 46, 4 lines below. If verses 44 and 45 were omitted, the scribe skipped from ta esbeston in verse 43 to the same words at the end of verse 45, 4 lines below. In both instances, in GA 807, the words ta esbeston and spenutai are stacked directly on top of one another with a medial dot punctuation mark. Moreover, the phrase immediately after spenutai begins kai eon ha, which may have also been contributed to this incidence of eye skip. Even though it requires the scribe of GA 377 to have made a longer skip than in the previous examples, the location of these words in GA 807 explains the omission. The adoption of corrections of the parent manuscript in its child is another of the most telling signs of a direct copy relationship. At Mark 8:3, GA 807 reads oikus, exclusively attested by the other 3 group witnesses. GA 377 diverges from the group by inserting the article tous before oikus. This variant only occurs in 11 manuscripts. And the reason GA377 differs from 807 and the rest of the group is that a later user added the words tus to GA807, and as a copy of that manuscript, the scribe of GA377 copied the amended text of its exemplar. Another correction occurs in GA807 occurs at mark 1542. The ECM records GA807 as a witness to the reading pros sabaton in 2 words, while GA377 reads pros sabaton, found in the Ausgangsstext text and the majority text. GA807 was corrected to the combined pros sabaton, offering a direct explanation for the reading found in GA377. Further evidence that 377 is a direct copy of GA807 are places where the 16th century scribe wrote in the exemplar. The same hand that wrote GA377 numbered the pages of GA807 in Matthew in the upper right corner in red ink and added folio numbers in black ink to the chapter list for Mark. There also are 2 instances where the scribe of GA377 may have corrected the text in GA807. The 2 disagree at mark 1436. In this variation, GA807 was corrected by a later hand to read par enigkai, which is also found in 377. The correction ligature and handwriting are comparable to those in GA377. Likewise, in Mark 1618 has been corrected from the variant reading ume autus blapse with an epsilon iota to the text found in GA377, ume autus blapse with an eta. The capital letter eta written over the epsilon iota ligature has the appearance of the handwriting in GA377, even though it's not the same letter form that we see in the model in the later, newer copy. These, therefore, could be examples of the scribe of GA377 amending their exemplar. But even if the scribe of 377 did not make these corrections in GA807, the presence of the corrections explains the readings that we do see in GA377. So the direct evidence of GA377's scribe using GA807 demonstrably confirms that the latter is a direct copy. At each point of comparison, the evidence suggests that GA377 is a direct copy of GA807. But what about other potential copies? The close agreement between the 12th century manuscripts GA238, 807, and 1160 raises the possibility that further direct copies might be identified, even though they are paleographically dated to the same century. In fact, GA807 has even fewer disagreements in Mark with 1160 than it does with its own child manuscript 377. Here's a list of the number of disagreements between each combination. GA238 disagrees with 807 77 times, 238 disagrees with 1160 71 times, and 807 disagrees with 1160 only 38 times. This level of total agreement would support the possibility of identifying another pair of Abschriften. Based on their agreements, the most likely pair is GA807 and GA1160. However, 1160 is the only codex in this group, as I mentioned before, to have a different commentary in the Gospel of John, making it the least likely to have been the parent or child of another group member. An examination of their 38 disagreements renders an unclear verdict about their relationship. In 16 of the variation units, one of the manuscripts attests a reading found in fewer than 10 manuscripts, including 7 singular readings if we omitted GA377 from the calculus. These could be instances of one of the copyists altering a reading from the other, or simply differences from their direct copies. The location of the disagreements in either manuscript does not explain the change in either direction. Many of the variants involve common sound changes or ioticism, and they do not correspond to corrections or irregularities in either codex. These factors indicate that GA807 and GA1160 are most likely not a pair of Abschriften. GA238 has a similar number of disagreements with GA807 and GA1160. Acknowledging that the low quality microfilm image is available, this color image is the only one that the Moscow library hosts with it, don't allow as thorough of an investigation of that manuscript compared to the color images of GA807 and 1160. The same criteria mitigates the likelihood of it being in a direct copy relationship with either manuscript. GA238 and 1160 have 18 split group double agreements in which they read against the text found in 377 and 807. This is one fewer than we had in that pair that I identified. And the instances of dual agreements were an important part of arguing that 377 is an Abschrift. While in the earlier example, many of the readings were only found in those manuscripts or in rarely attested variants, in 17 of the 18 readings GA238 and GA1160 share, they read with the majority text against the rest of the group. There are no true dual readings in Mark where 238 and 1160 have a reading that's not found in any other manuscript. So I would say that GA238 cannot be proven to be the parent or copy of another member of the group. It cannot be proven that there is any direct copy relationship between 238, 807, or 1160. Detecting obschriften is not an easy task, and Alan Farnes remarked that, and I quote, because establishing an obschrift is difficult on textual grounds alone, it is difficult to determine an obschrift of a very high quality manuscript, end quote. These three codices may have remarkable consanguineous biblical text and mark and many similarities in their composition, but the fact that they are near exact points towards each being a well-executed copy of another codex or a well-masked sibling of the other. So, in conclusion, four codices, GA238, GA377, GA807, and GA1160 constitute a textual group within the corpus of Greek New Testament manuscripts. They contain a unique combination of Catenae and the Gospels in alternating format, and they have a distinctive form of the Gospel of Mark. Their many similarities raise the possibility of multiple direct copying relationships. GA377, the youngest member of the group, has here been shown to be a copy of GA807. It is only the 22nd direct copy of a surviving Greek New Testament manuscript to be identified, and the 9th, which also contains a catena. The other three codices cannot be proven to be copies of one another on textual or codicological grounds. In each case, the alternating catena format may have facilitated careful copying of the lemmata from their exemplar, leading to a high degree of agreement and their familial distinctiveness. An intriguing possibility is that the three 12th century codices are directly copied from the same manuscript, which would explain how they came to have such a similar gospel text and catena text, the commentary on John and GA1160 notwithstanding. This would also explain common codicological features were not explored in this presentation. Identifying this group of manuscripts and a new obschrift provides opportunities for further research on the textual history of the Gospels, catena manuscripts, and the provenance of Byzantine manuscripts more broadly. The tools of the CBGM and complete collation of more manuscripts produced for the ECM editions not only advance research on the text and history of the Greek New Testament, but provide the resources to identify direct copies and new groups of manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a fascinating and very clear case. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I want to understand what form of copies, I think the manuscript be copied and found any clues.
So the original draft of this, so this is going to be published as an article in the future, and the original draft of that, it will become two things hopefully someday. But I've looked into the provenance of the manuscripts, and it's a fascinating tale. GA377 entered the Vatican in an era when they were acquiring numerous manuscripts from other collectors in Italy. And it falls into this very strange window where it might belong to one collection or another. And so I have a working hypothesis that perhaps that it came from Crete rather than from being copied in Rome, as another Italian scholar has suggested, and which would help with the evidence for GA07. But the Greek library in Athens acquired most of their manuscripts in the earliest period from direct donors, and they don't have records of where those came from. So I have a very solid case for where the other three manuscripts go back to the 14th century at least, and then in one case to the 12th century when it was copied. But 807, it has a very nebulous past from when it first appears in 19th century manuscript lists.
Building on that, we have an online question asking about when you said they were sister manuscripts, potentially whether there's any evidence that they share practices to same story.
I think that would be, I haven't looked into that, is the short answer. There are lots of codicological features that are very similar. And so, but they do have some different artistic styles that would potentially indicate that they maybe came from the same region, but it seems like maybe they didn't come from the same immediate place.
Just as a quick follow-up, because I couldn't tell, so the hands of the three 12th century manuscripts are obviously distinct.
Yes.
Yeah, I just couldn't tell.
Yeah, I didn't detail into that. They were very clear pictures for making that sort of determination, but they're distinctly different, without a doubt. David? Sorry.
I happen to notice that you have a manuscript from Patmos and one from Moscow that are catena and that are very, very, very similar, really identical. I also have a manuscript from
Yes.
almost identical. Do you have historical reconstruction for how they got so far?
So the manuscript on Athos is, the two Moscow manuscripts both went from Moscow or to Moscow from Athos in 1685. And then they entered, they were originally one document that was split in the 18th century around when Matthias was there, and then went to separate places. But they were originally one manuscript in Athos, and it entered the Lavra in the 14th century. And then we don't know where it came from before that. The Patmos manuscript is on the earliest record of manuscripts we have at Patmos, which dates within a century of its copying. So it's potentially one of the manuscripts that was brought there originally by the founder of the monastery, or it arrived shortly thereafter. And so it can't be proven yet that they came from the same place to separate locations at a different time. There is a monastery near Constantinople that I like. That's the next avenue of research for me, is looking in that direction. But I don't know where they both came from separately to those locations. But 1160 was probably not copied at Patmos, just based on how early it was there.
And how Patmos was established.
Right. Your example is very interesting to me as well.
Joe,
Just on Mark, from what I recall from Moscow, internationally.
Yeah, it is.
The others were more modest.
Mhm. Yeah, 807 has the next most amount of ornate detail, but it's a different artistic style. So the GA 807 in Athens has the floral style, which you don't see in 238.
I found it fascinating that you said at an earlier point that alternating Catenae manuscripts were copied, were harder to copy. And so I was wondering whether in the overall transmission of the Greek text and everything, they would be more like a cul-de-sac, therefore, like a dead end. But then on the other hand, I thought, well, we do have copies, at least within the Catena commentary tradition. Do we have evidence that they were used a lot or read a lot? Because then it would not be a dead end, just from our next critical idea.
So Hugh, in his paper in Dallas last year, made a really clear explanation for, at least according to the textual flow diagrams, how alternating catenae usually descend from one another or a frame manuscript based on the ECM data, but rarely, if not ever, are at the head of a stream for frame manuscripts. So it doesn't seem like people are taking the non-continuous text that's segmented and then putting it now into a traditional continuous format. But we do have evidence that these manuscripts were used. So in GA 238, there's a note in the back that it was used in catechal training at Athos before it went to Moscow. And so it was at least being used for those purposes in that monastery.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, if not, then a huge thank you again for concluding.